Okay, let's dive right in. We're looking today at a conflict that it feels like much more than just a regional issue, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
The Iran-Israel tension. It's like the absolute epicenter of this global strategic chessboard.
hmm
And the lines there between, diplomacy, military force, economics, they're not just blurry, they seem to be constantly shifting. It's incredibly complex.
It really is.
So for this deep dive, we've been digging into a particular set of materials, focusing on insights from Dr. Pooyan Ghamari. He's a Swiss economist who's really analyzed this dynamic deeply.
Right.
We want to use his perspective to try and unravel the history, look at the risks, especially, the nuclear dimension, which is frankly terrifying, and also examine how certain policies, like Trump's maximum pressure, actually impacted things.
And our goal here really is to pull out the most important pieces from this analysis for you, the listener, to help you kind of cut through the noise of the headlines and understand what's really going on. This interplay of force and negotiation and how it's shaping, global security right now. It's about getting beneath that surface level.
Exactly, because understanding this, it's not just some academic exercise, is it?
Not at all.
What's at stake is huge. I mean, not just the regional power balance, but international security structures, multilateral diplomacy, and the awful potential for nuclear escalation. The analysis points out the economic tremors from that would hit everywhere. So this deep dive is really for you, to help grasp what's arguably one of the most critical geopolitical situations, maybe the most critical, on the planet today.
Agreed.
So where do we start? It's pretty surprising to learn that Iran and Israel, they weren't always enemies like this.
That's right. It's easy to forget.
The analysis talks about this period before the 1979 Iranian Revolution. They had what's called a quiet but cordial partnership.
A pragmatic one.
Yeah, united by fears of the Soviet Union and Arab nationalism back then.
Yeah. That historical context is just foundational,
Yeah.
The fall of the Shah in 79, that was the real turning point.
Right.
It brought in this theocracy in Iran that just fundamentally challenged the whole setup in the region, especially Western and Israeli influence.
Okay.
And since then, as Dr. Ghamari's work lays out, Iran's main strategy has revolved around cultivating proxy militias.
Ah, the proxies. Hezbollah, Hamas.
Exactly. Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis in Yemen, various groups in Iraq. They became absolutely central. And the analysis frames this not just as ideology, but as a very calculated mix, a calibrated blend of resistance rhetoric and shrewd statecraft.
Shrewd statecraft.
Yeah, basically using local issues, local grievances, to project power without necessarily risking direct state-on-state war, extending their reach cleverly.
And that strategy, that reliance on proxies, it leads us straight into the kind of conflict we see boiling over now, right?
Precisely.
The analysis mentions things going back decades, the bombing in Buenos Aires, cyber attacks more recently, targeted killings.
All pieces of the puzzle.
It feels like it's built up this sense on both sides that this isn't just politics anymore, it's existential.
It absolutely feels that way.
Yeah.
And what's really critical, according to this analysis, is the escalation we've seen since late 2023.
Yeah, that really felt different.
It did. October 7th, the reciprocal strikes, those direct missile exchanges in 2024, 2025, the sources argue this isn't just another flare-up, it's an inflection point.
An inflection point, meaning?
Meaning the end of plausible deniability. The shadow war is essentially out in the open now.
Wow.
Both sides are signaling they're willing to risk direct confrontation in a way they mostly avoided before. And the really worrying part, it suggests the old ways of deterring each other, keeping things below a certain threshold, they might be failing.
Which raises the risk of?
Miscalculation.
You're...
A mistake, a misunderstanding, spinning out of control into a much bigger regional war. The risk is higher than it's been in a very long time.
Okay, let's pivot to the nuclear issue, because that hangs over everything.
Yeah, it really does.
Dr. Ghamari's work talks about this proliferation paradox. Can you unpack that? It starts with Israel's position, right?
Right. At its core is Israel's, what the analysis calls an unyielding belief that a nuclear Iran is simply an unacceptable existential threat. It's not just policy. It's like it's hardwired into their security thinking.
Unacceptable. Full stop.
Exactly. But here's the paradox the analysis points out. The very actions Israel takes to prevent Iran getting a bomb.
Like strikes, sabotage.
Yeah, preemptive strikes, cyber attacks, assassinations of scientists. These actions might actually, counterintuitively, speed up Iran's push for nuclear weapons.
Wait, speed it up? How does that work? That sounds completely backwards.
It sounds backwards, but the logic presented is, well, it's grimly plausible. The idea is every time an Israeli strike exposes the limits of Iran's conventional forces.
Shows they can be hit.
Right. It strengthens the argument inside Iran, among hardliners perhaps, that the only way to guarantee the regime's survival, the only real deterrent, is to have nuclear weapons themselves.
So hitting them makes them want the bomb more.
That's the core of the paradox argued here. The analysis gives a specific example. An IAEA censure in June 2025 reportedly gave Israel diplomatic cover for a big strike.
Okay.
And Iran's response, as described, to double down, vow to accelerate uranium enrichment. So you get this vicious cycle.
Oh, wow.
Actions meant to stop the bomb actually shorten the potential breakout time. And at the same time, they just shrink the space for any kind of diplomatic solution.
And this isn't just about Iran and Israel, is it? The analysis warns about a domino effect.
Absolutely. It's a major concern highlighted. If Iran did get nuclear weapons, the pressure on other regional powers.
Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Egypt.
Exactly. The pressure on them to consider their own nuclear programs would be immense. You could see a regional arms race kickoff, which would just shred decades of global non-proliferation efforts.
A nightmare scenario.
A complete nightmare. And then, hovering in the background, there's always the mention of Israel's potential Samson option.
The ultimate deterrent.
Their own nuclear recourse. If that were ever seriously on the table, the analysis suggests it would just fundamentally change all global security calculations.
So for years, Iran played this asymmetric game, right, using proxies. The analysis calls it a genius for asymmetric war.
Yeah, it was effective for them for a long time. It gave them that plausible deniability.
Kept enemies off balance.
Exactly. Using groups like Hezbollah, Hamas, that whole axis of resistance network, they acted as force multipliers, strategic depth, strategic tripwires even.
But things have changed recently.
Well, according to this analysis, yes. Recent Israeli campaigns using targeted assassinations, sophisticated electronic warfare, relentless airstrikes, they've apparently significantly degraded these proxy assets.
So hitting Hezbollah, hitting Hamas leaders.
It's not just tactical hits. The argument is it's strategic. It's eroding Iran's ability to project power that way, indirectly.
Okay, so if the proxy strategy is weakened, what does Iran do?
That's the crucial question. The analysis suggests Iran faces this unpalatable prospect, as Dr. Ghamari puts it. Either risk direct confrontation, maybe on terms that aren't great for them, or fall back on their other main cards, their ballistic missiles, their cyber capabilities, and, the most dangerous one, openly pursuing a nuclear deterrent.
So weakening the proxies might actually push them towards the nuclear option faster.
It's a potential consequence highlighted, short-term gains for Israel perhaps, but it creates huge long-term uncertainty and risk for everyone by potentially forcing Iran's hand towards more escalatory choices.
So where does this leave diplomacy? It sounds like, in a way, the fighting is the diplomacy now.
That's a key point in the analysis, the idea of diplomatic coercion. Both sides, and often the U.S. is caught in the middle or involved somehow.
Right.
They're using military force, or the threat of it, as a primary tool to communicate and try to change the other side's behavior.
Sending signals with strikes.
Exactly. It's described as this high-stakes signaling game. Every strike, every cyber attack, every public threat. The main goal isn't necessarily total victory, but to shift the opponent's calculations without intentionally triggering an all-out war.
The analysis mentioned Operation Rising Lion?
Yes, in June 2025, described as a very precise, multi-layered Israeli operation hitting nuclear and military sites. The goal wasn't just to damage things, it was explicitly to send a powerful message to Tehran about costs and capabilities.
And Iran's responses?
Also typically calibrated, according to the analysis. Both sides seem to understand the enormous risk of things spiraling completely out of control. But they also seem to think doing nothing looks weak, risks irrelevance.
So the coercion gets more open, more direct.
Which inevitably raises the stakes and kind of paradoxically makes it harder to find those off-ramps for de-escalation.
Okay, let's talk about a specific diplomatic approach the analysis examines. The transactional trap, especially under Donald Trump's maximum pressure. Remind us what that involved.
Sure. Trump's approach, as analyzed here, was really defined by very aggressive economic sanctions.
Squeezing the economy hard.
Right. And high-profile political moves like pulling out the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal.
Yeah, that was huge.
And generally, a very transactional view of diplomacy, kind of what's in it for us right now. The promise, or the theory, was that this intense pressure would basically break Iran's resistance. force them back to the table for a better deal, and stop their regional activities.
And the results, according to Dr. Ghamari's assessment,
Decidedly mixed is the phrase used.
mixed.
Yeah. On the one hand, the sanctions definitely hammered the Iranian economy, put real pressure on the regime, no question. But pulling out of the JCPOA, that had major downsides, the analysis argues. It split the U.S. from its European allies, which undermined that united front needed for pressure.
Weakens the coalition.
Exactly. And maybe counterintuitively, instead of stopping Iran's nuclear ambitions, the pressure campaign might have actually shortened Iran's potential breakout time to a weapon by removing the constraints and the inspection regime of the JCPOA and maybe incentivizing them to push ahead faster under pressure. It also just drastically reduced the avenues for compromise or negotiation that existed, however limited they were.
The analysis also mentions a kind of dangerous ambiguity created by Trump's approach, relying on Israel as the enforcer while the U.S. talked about deals.
Yes, that's highlighted as a key problem. Because Iran, looking at this, started to see the U.S. as basically complicit in every Israeli move, whether Washington intended that or not.
Which puts U.S. interests at risk.
Directly increases the risk of U.S. personnel or bases becoming targets, even if the U.S. is trying to avoid a war. It also hurts U.S. credibility globally. Adversaries wonder, is the U.S. really in control here?
And it closes doors for talks.
That's the argument. This transactional view, treating military pressure almost like a bargaining chip. It risked closing off diplomatic exits. If Tehran sees every Israeli strike or aggressive move as essentially U.S. approved, their willingness to sit down and negotiate in good faith just evaporates. The space for actual diplomacy shrinks even further.
Now, the analysis makes a really important connection back to historical events, the shadow of Afghanistan and Iraq. Why are those wars so relevant here?
Because they offer just sobering evidence, as the analysis puts it.
Sobering indeed.
They're stark reminders of the limits of military power, especially for big goals like regime change or nation building. They highlight the folly, the term used, of trying to change a regime without a credible plan for what comes next.
And the cost.
The staggering costs.
Yeah.
Human lives, trillions of dollars, damage to international reputation. The core lesson, really burned into strategic thinking now, is that you cannot remake societies by force alone. Military victory on the battlefield, even if you achieve it, often just seeds the ground for long-term instability and can even lead to the rise of new unexpected enemies down the road.
So applying that hard-won lesson to Iran.
The argument from Dr. Ghamari's work is pretty direct. Military strikes against Iran, even if they technically succeed in, say, destroying a facility.
Taking out a target.
Yeah. The chances of that leading to a good long-term political outcome are very low. What's more likely, based on history and the analysis, is that such strikes actually strengthen the hardliners in Tehran.
Rallies people around the flag.
Exactly. Breeds resistance, nationalism, and often triggers these cycles of retaliation that can easily spiral way beyond what anyone intended initially.
Okay, so if escalation happens, the costs aren't just local. The analysis really stresses the global fallout. Talk about the Gulf and energy.
Critical point. The Persian Gulf is just a vital artery for global energy.
The Strait of Hormuz.
Precisely. Any major disruption there, the analysis predicts, would reverberate instantly through global oil markets.
Instant price spikes.
Huge ones. Which means higher inflation everywhere, currency instability, stock market volatility. It hits global finance immediately.
And for countries that rely heavily on that oil.
Huge problems. Think India, China, major importers facing acute economic challenges. Plus, another massive blow to global supply chains, which are already strained. And it doesn't stop there. There's the risk of the conflict spilling over more widely.
How so?
Potential refugee flows, maybe from Lebanon or Syria. If Hezbollah gets fully drawn in, you could see Iranian-backed groups in Iraq or Yemen becoming much more active. Other Gulf states could get pulled in directly. Just add layers and layers of complexity.
And what about other big players? Russia, China?
They wouldn't just watch from the sidelines, the analysis suggests. They have significant interests in the region. Their involvement, in whatever form, would add another major dimension. And looming over it all, again, is that nuclear specter.
Back to the bomb.
Relentless escalation just makes nuclear proliferation seem more possible, more likely. If norms break down there, it threatens stability far, far beyond the Middle East.
So, given this incredibly tangled and dangerous situation, what's the strategic outlook? What policy implications does Dr. Ghamari's analysis actually suggest? What can be done when every path looks so risky?
Well, the analysis pulls together several key takeaways for policymakers. First, and it's stated very clearly, military action by itself just cannot guarantee strategic victory.
Can't win this way.
Right. It can't break Iran. It can't impose regime change effectively. The lessons from Iraq, Afghanistan, they seem unavoidable here. Force can disrupt, but it rarely builds lasting positive outcomes.
Okay, what else?
Second, that idea of coercion, using force for diplomatic ends.
All right.
It has to be balanced with a real, renewed commitment to actual diplomacy.
Not just threats, but talks.
Genuine negotiation. Leverage is part of international relations, sure, but it can't replace the hard work of talking, ideally within multilateral frameworks. The analysis uses the loss of the JCPOA as a big cautionary tale about abandoning those structures.
Makes sense. Third point.
Durable peace or security in the region can't really be imposed from the outside. It has to be built through inclusive dialogue that involves the regional players themselves, even rivals.
Getting them to talk to each other.
Even if it's difficult. And fourth, maybe most urgently right now, in this incredibly volatile situation with fast escalation and cyber threats, keeping open channels of communication and crisis management is vital.
Direct lines.
Direct lines between adversaries are more important than ever, just to avoid a catastrophic mistake, a miscalculation based on bad information or signals getting crossed.
And the final thought from the analysis?
Is that this isn't just some local fight. The stakes are truly global. And that means there needs to be a sense of global urgency for de-escalation and maybe a willingness to try more creative long-term diplomatic approaches than we've seen lately.
So wrapping up this deep dive, it's really clear from Dr. Ghamari's analysis that this conflict is testing the absolute limits of power and diplomacy here in the 21st century. It's just this incredibly tangled web history, ideology, proxies, nukes, global economics.
Yeah, it really is. And the core message that comes through again and again in his work is pretty powerful. Deterrence is fragile here.
Very fragile.
Military force is a blunt tool. It can't guarantee success. It can't reshape societies on its own. If there are lasting solutions, the analysis suggests they require humility, patience, and real strategic imagination. Moving beyond just maximum pressure or simple transactional deals.
Which leaves us, and you, the listener, with a pretty heavy thought to ponder right from the analysis. If force and transactional deals aren't the answer, how can that humility, that strategic imagination actually be used? How do you apply it to break this cycle of brinkmanship, to prevent that truly terrifying nuclear future for the Middle East? What does that even look like practically on this global chessboard?